Inherent in us all is this belief that in order to be strong, I can't be weak. We start to have this view that any expression of vulnerability indicates being incapable of doing the job. I know that to be a complete falsehood.
And welcome to Volume 2 of the best bits of the second half of 2024. I hope you enjoyed the best bits Volume 1 last week, and I know that you're going to love the episode this week, which showcases more stories, more reflections, and amazing guests. As we step into a new year, whether it's been a great year, whether it's thrown up some curveballs or challenges, know that heading into a new year is a great opportunity to reset, to reimagine your goals and reimagine your path forward.
Let's not focus on the thing we're trying to avoid. Let's double down on that's super important to us, which is actually life and living. I will not worry about the day that I die, but I will be obsessed with the way that I'm living and making the very, very best of it.
I remember when my kids started the change, hitting puberty, and I used to get, I hate you. And I used to say, that's okay right now. I'm going to keep loving you for the rest of my life, regardless. And I just leave it. There's nothing to come back to when you say that's okay to feel the feels. I'm just going to keep loving you through all that feel.
Yep. The best way to combat hate is love.
Yeah, I'm loving you through your frustration. I'm not even going to name it, because for me to name that as anything but hate would be disrespecting where you are right now. I can think inside my head, gee, you're frustrated. Wow. At another time, we can maybe connect over this, but right now I'm just going to pour the love back and then just give you space and see what happens.
Yeah. Through our journey, Nikki, as parents, as we all know, and I'm sure there's a lot of parents listening to this now, but as parents, when we go through a lot of those experiences and we hear what our teenagers say to us and our kids say to us, at times we can feel like we're failing. How do we overcome that as parents?
I remember one of those most awesome days in life where everything was going wrong and everything I touched with the kids was just going to shiatsu, right? And I just in frustration went, this is the first time I've parented a 14-year-old, You're not a piece of IKEA furniture. You didn't come with instructions. Help me. Because I just couldn't understand why I just wasn't good enough in my mind. I felt like a failure. Yep. And their little faces were the honesty of that vulnerability of I've got no idea what I'm doing here was quite a door opener for all of us, which comes back to that, reflection that I had that our parents would have never said that. I think I grew up thinking you're going to hit 25 and everything's going to fall into place and you are so going to know what life is. And I got to 25 and I went, oh, maybe it's 30 for me. And I got to 30 and I went, no, this can't be it. So that, just being vulnerable enough to say, hey, we're not, and you think you're getting you got it right with the first one. You go, okay, I've nailed it. I understand the first child. Okay, we're getting through this. Well, the second one's not going to be the same as the first one, either is the third, fourth, fifth. And so every beautiful soul who comes through your family unit as part of it is a unique set of challenges, and they're going to have a different learning style. They might be highly visual, highly auditory. They might think differently and have some sort of incredible diversity superpower that you need to recognize and nurture and grow with. And so you need an IKEA instruction book for each one of them, but none of them come with one.
No, and like an IKEA, sometimes maybe there's a screw missing sometimes, and there's a piece missing, or there's two left over, and you go, that'll be okay.
Yeah, should be right.
I'll sit on that one day and I'll break it, or I'll fall off it or something like that, and I'll go, that's where that screw was. But I actually think they sit in the factory and they go, we're just going to put some extra pieces in.
That's
just
right.
to stuff with them.
Let's really make someone's day.
Now, I wanted to ask you, I've always had an approach, and Trace has always had the approach as well, that we really focus on the mental health of our children when it comes to school, when it comes to life. And it's interesting speaking to teachers, speaking to principals, and the journey of our two teenage boys as well. There is a real issue with absenteeism at schools and kids not wanting to go to school. And it's interesting, I said to a teacher not long ago, I said, you're really putting a focus on kids attending school, but can we put a focus on why the kids don't want to attend school?
Yeah.
Let's turn this around. You're putting it on it's a problem with the children or the child. It's actually not. It's actually a problem. Like if you've got a workplace, right, a business, and people don't want to come to work and people resign and you have a really bad retention rate and the productivity is down, the results are down. Now, do you sit there and go, it's all their problem? Why are all these team members?
Yeah.
Why is there the problem, right? Now, our education system is broken. I don't care wherever you look at it. I think it's completely broken. And
it's
we
written
focus
for a
on
different day and age, isn't it? It's just
it
not.
is. It
yeah.
is. You know, it's like it's the, you know, like the square peg, you know, like round hole. It's just we're wanting our kids to be unique and be their individual self and unleash their personalities and everything. But we're going to put you in the same classroom with the same kids teaching the same curriculum. And I know there is different systems out there that are changing that, and there's different school setups and we are getting a lot better at it. But, you know, things have to change massively. But for me, I've always focused on if our son hasn't felt great about something or either of our sons hasn't felt great about something or hasn't felt right, I'm happy for them to stay home, right? Now, it's not day after day after day, but it's about how do we get these kids to interact more? So I'd love to know your approach, how your view on how you have managed that with your kids and how you're seeing that kind of play out in society.
Great observation and question combined, Steve. So this comes back to a real fundamental piece that I like to work on, and that is that our kids aren't broken. We just need to adjust the way we communicate and work with them, right?
Love it.
I get parents say, can you fix my kid? Your kid doesn't need fixing. God, they're beautiful. Okay, we just need to adjust and shift what we're doing, because there's this, you know, there's the fundamental need of a human is that they need to feel safe. They need to feel loved and belonging. And those two things, well, loved and belonging sort of group together. And so safety is yes, we've got a roof over our head, great. Safety is also psychological safety as well as physical safety, the knowledge that we can get through together regardless. So that resilience piece is a part of that safety piece. But that safety piece is also comes back to being acknowledged and that belonging. So if you don't, it comes back to when we were cavemen. If you didn't belong to a tribe, your T-Rex would eat you when you went out to get the water. Or if the woman didn't belong to a tribe, then as she lay and gave birth, a dinosaur would come and get you or something would happen. So we've got this fundamental need to be part of a tribe. It's prehistoric. And to feel like we belong means we need to be seen and heard as individuals. So you've got a whole lot of teenagers who are wanting to belong to a tribe. They get to a certain point in their lives where they've belonged to their family tribe by default, but now they're blossoming into their own little unique individuals. They've got amazing hormones going through their brains that are making them slightly irrational. Their prefrontal cortex has gone off to Mars for a couple of years. You get flashes of brilliance combined with someone who can't tie their shoelaces. And so they're really struggling to feel confident within themselves because they don't understand the brain fog comes and goes and it will clear and everything's great. So they're struggling to feel great. They don't feel seen and heard as this new individual, but they have a sense that they're becoming something new and they know that they want to be seen as more than the daughter or the son. They want to be seen as the individual. And we've got a whole lot of parents, teachers, people in society who don't say, I see you for who you are, and gosh, I accept you for everything that's going on right now, with greatest amount of empathy and compassion. And that leads to, I don't want to go to school because I don't feel part of a tribe at school, because everyone's in fight, flight, freeze because they're all having hormone moments and they can't, that's a really difficult situation. And teachers, I don't think, are trained adequately to navigate that system and navigate that part of the teenager's journey. So if they don't belong to a tribe at school, they don't want to go. If they find a tribe outside of the home that gives them more or greater acceptance than the parents, then that's a teenager who leaves on the bus and for days and doesn't answer the phone and doesn't have a problem with it. Or we have a teenager who locks themselves in their room and has a fantasy world where they're acknowledged and seen and heard and part of a tribe that is a virtual tribe that may or may not give them that real, connection with integrity. And so as teachers or trainers and mentors in the space, we need to be able to start seeing people for who they are. And if someone's having a huge hormone day, to not belittle them or put pressure on them to do what they did yesterday, to understand that their learning's going to be up and down and all over the place, and to understand that they're really developing, whether they're highly visual or highly auditory or kinesthetic, or they've got a read-writing preference, and that may shift and change a little. It won't much, but we have to give them grace, with grace, and understand and just be there. And I think, a lot of parents say, I don't know where my kid goes. Your kid goes to where they feel they belong.
In terms of the dust diseases space, it's a really interesting time in Australian history, and particularly Australian legal history. So the problem of particularly silica-related disease is just exploding. It is true that as a community, as a government, as a health sector, these issues weren't examined probably adequately enough in the past, but now that the lens has been turned onto them, that workers are getting screened appropriately, those more high-risk workers are being identified as having disease, and then the issues that flow from that. So there's a greater focus on it, which is wonderful. But it's also presented this huge issue that a large proportion of the workplace, the workforce, particularly mining, tunnelling, construction in particular, just have hideous high amounts of silica-related lung disease in particular. And so you got to examine firstly, they got disease, but why is this happening? And when you peel back a very thin surface layer, you'll see that, many workplaces are treating the issue of dust exposure as a significant risk to their workforce, or they're just not dealing with it at all. And that's why you're seeing such disease. And so the challenge from a occupational health and safety point of view is to get employers to understand the high-risk nature of what they do, get employers to adopt and force them, cajole them, require them to ensure that their system of work is adequate enough to ward against and mitigate against the risk that they're putting their workforce in and making them face day in and day out. And then the third element, of course, is ensuring that the employee workforce is culturally adept and understands what the risks are, so that when their employer designs a system of work, that they obviously then adopt and do everything reasonable to abide by that. And so in terms of where the law is at, the law right now doesn't treat those high-risk silica workplaces in a way that it should, so far as setting the minimum standard of exposure and ensuring and making sure employers comply with that minimum standard by various means and methods. And so right now, post the ban on engineered stone from 1 July of this year, which was a wonderful sort of result of all the advocacy over the past couple of years, the focus is now on every other workplace which is high risk: mining, road and rail tunnelling, quarrying, construction, of which there are literally thousands and thousands of workplaces. So the challenge is much more significant right now, and the challenge is all ahead of us, and it's going to be a long road, but a road that definitely myself and the firm is committed to seeing through and working with, you know, the Australian Workers Union and other unions who are representing those very same members of those workforces, because this change is very necessary. You just can't simply see the levels of industrial disease from silica exposure keep repeating for the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years in Australia. That would be a hideous outcome. So we've got to do something now. Otherwise, what are we in the game for? What are we doing this for not trying to create a safer workplace, try and do something positive for people?
Mm. So for those listening, and I know for me, prior to meeting, Matt and his dad, one of the key things I suppose everyone would know, if we think dust diseases, we would think James Hardie. Everyone would know that. It's so synonymous, I suppose, with the issue around dust diseases and class actions. And I think was it 2009, I think, that kind of came to a head?
Yeah, it was a little bit earlier. So 2004, they had the big James Hardie, they call the Jackson Inquiry, where Hardie's tried to go offshore and indicate to the marketplace, at least in Australia, that they had fully funded all their future asbestos liabilities. So whereas Hardie said, 264 million, that should be enough, it was actually into the billions. And so they were very, very underfunded, and that's when that issue really blew up. And thankfully it did, because Hardie's would have gotten away scot-free effectively and been much like, which is a real sad situation in the US and the UK, where the product manufacturers from the asbestos industry have all gone deregistered and defunct because the liabilities against them for the asbestos injuries basically put them out of business, and therefore all the future victims can't claim compensation from them. So we're able to address that in Australia through a very concerted effort in 2004, a massive campaign led by the famous Bernie Bannon, and on behalf of via the Australian Council of Trade Unions, on behalf of the union movement, really went in hard and justifiably and correctly to make sure that Hardie's didn't do what they wanted to do, but had to commit to a level of funding, which today makes the fund, the compensation fund sitting behind the James Hardie companies, fully funded, and asbestos victims today are still getting fully compensated, which is a wonderful outcome from that advocacy from 20 years ago, and hopefully that still continues well into the future. So
tell me, Jonathan, why then, are we still having this debate around dust diseases? And, shouldn't we have learned?
100%, Steve. It is the most confounding question when if you just take one step back and look at the industrial landscape of Australia. Why can't we learn the lessons from one era or one industry or one company and apply the learnings across the board? It's like institutional amnesia around it. And I think, that's why I often indicate from a governmental regulatory point of view, there's not enough, there's not enough long-term planning around these issues about how it might apply into the future. And we just see history repeating itself, and it's just so tragic. And so one sort of case in point, so we got the engineered stone ban 1 July, but then the conversation should now be, indeed it should have been before 1 July, and it kind of was, but post 1 July, well, what are the replacement products? What are we now seeing in the Bunnings and the Mitre 10s, and what is Metricon putting into their massive home unit developments as a replacement? Is that product indeed safe? Where's the scrutiny around the replacement? Because if we do nothing and just allow it to occur, in 10 or 20 years' time, we'll see a repeat if these products are indeed unsafe or the work practices don't match the risk inherent in the products. And so you look at it, porcelain is now the big replacement. Porcelain still has up to 30% crystalline silica in it. I mean, what are the warnings around it? What are the safe work practices suggested? Do employees know about it? Do companies know about it? Are we seeing just another repeat? And so one hopes that it doesn't keep happening, Steve. But I mean, if history is a good indicator of future performance, the workers of this world are going to cop it again, the next generation, if we don't learn from our mistakes in the past.
Yeah. So obviously you talk about legislation and changes that have happened. Talk to me about what you'd like to see in the future around dust diseases and how they're handled by organisations, governments, and obviously some of these safeguards that are put in place to help team members and employees really kind of, look after their health and focus on their futures?
Yep, that's a multifaceted in terms of what should be in place, and if you want a greenfield and go to a aspirational ideal land, it's got to start with sufficient and reasonable information around the absolute extreme risks of being exposed to the various toxic dusts in the workplace, identifying where the exposures occurred, and informing both employers, companies, employees, and contractors about those extreme risks, and making sure that information is up to date. It's continual reinforcement of those issues, because people can forget, people can stop listening. We spoke about asbestos before. People sometimes just are sick of hearing the asbestos information and story, and sometimes they do switch off. And that's why today, no doubt, even in Brisbane, we're going to have a worker being exposed to asbestos in some form or fashion where they really should be because of that. So the information and awareness about extreme risk has to be up to date. It has to be continual. And then based on the particular workplace, the system around the maximum exposure limits really does need to be looked at. And the argument oftentimes with industry is that, we can't measure it and it's too hard to implement. Well, okay, let's really drill down into that, because, the profits from coal mining, the profits from metalliferous mining, the profits from road tunnelling are just huge. There is more than sufficient capital to reinvest into proper research and development to understand the risks, and then design specific engineering controls to absolutely reduce the risk of exposure. And then also, added on top of that, make sure the individual buy their own personal protective equipment, their PPE, is adequate and up to scratch to meet that risk. And I think the rhetoric in the community these days, and it's driven by the big employers, it's driven by the big contracting companies, is to say that, workers aren't wearing their masks, so they're to blame. It's the most shameless, in my view, victim blaming in a corporate sense that keeps being peddled out. You just can't keep blaming workers for not wearing their mask. If the employers designing the system of work, if the employer's there to ensure that employees can comply with the system of work, it's on the employer to ensure that that employee, that individual, is aware of the dangers and actually wears their mask. And if something goes wrong in that system, justifiably and reasonably, the employer is to blame for that. So you just can't turn around and keep blaming employees and contractors all the time. It's not always their fault, not at all. And then I think the third element, if you look at information awareness properly, and then ensuring that the regulations force employers and companies to implement the correct system of work by engineering controls and PPE. The third element is to ensure that the regulators are properly resourced to make the employees and contractors, in that sense, comply with the law. That is, enforce the law through prosecutions and through SNAP inspections on sites, and to all those things which seem idealistic in today's terms, but really are just forms part of what a regulator should be properly resourced to do, and what they always ask for but never get, is to make sure that those regulators have the resources and can actually move forward with regulatory compliance and call out those bad employers and those bad actors in the construction industry, for example, and bring work-safe prosecutions for those really egregious examples. And, you often talk about the influence of government, the influence of elections, the influence of how various political parties are funded. This is where you see the rubber hit the road, where you see regulators, safe work regulators, underfunded perennially, because they know that if they are funded adequately, they'll call out the very same companies who may be contributing to the major parties, for example, and those parties might be in government at that point in time. So it's all sort of, the answer is very difficult, but in terms of the broad areas of how we should go about tackling it, they're the three areas in my view, Steve, that we should be trying to focus in on to try and address this problem for the long term.
So I had my head injury, and then one of my very best friends, Di, had breast cancer, and so she's not meant to be here. She's given 365 days to live, and this was like 14 years ago. But she had a mastectomy, just one though, so she was super self-conscious, getting changed in like a changing room or at the beach or wherever, to the point where she just stopped swimming. and she loves swimming. So I gave her a towelie, and it like literally changed her world. She got back swimming. She was like swimming at the side of the lake. Like she had one in the car. Wherever she went past water, she'd be in it. And so that I was like, okay, cool. This is wild because it's just a towelie, but it's had such an impact on her life. So this was kind of like the brainchild of like Show Us Your Tits campaign, which we got our customers to draw their boobs and just kind of like, I don't know, like a new dye had it. I know the statistics. In New Zealand, it's 1 in 9. In Australia, I think it's 1 in 7 women get breast cancer, and guys get it too. So like I knew the statistics. I knew there would be a lot. And if I thought about how many customers we have, I don't know. I guess I just didn't expect the influx of boobs that come into our emails and the stories with them. And poor Rach, who's one of our customer service chicks, she spent the day crying down there replying to emails because the stories coming in were so sad and heartfelt, and so many people have been affected by this. And like one family sent them, their mum, their dad, and their daughter had all had it, which is wild. But yeah, anyway, we cleaned all the boobs, weaved them into a towel poncho, and we are giving 100% of profits to the Breast Cancer Foundation here in New Zealand.
Phenomenal.
So
Yep.
we had a goal of 25 grand. We're at 35 now, which is really cool. But the impact that has had on our brand as well, you know, I didn't do it because I wanted people to love us. I did it because I wanted people to be able to change freely at the beach again, you know, and people that have been impacted by breast cancer. But I also did it because we've made the design quite subtle. So it's like a dark pink and a light pink. And if you saw someone from afar, you're like, oh, they're wearing a patterned towel. Cool. But if you get up close and look past them, you're like, mate, they're covered in boobs. And then that's a whole conversation, right? Around like the importance of self-checking and raising awareness around it. And we had a photo shoot with some of the ladies that had drawn the boobs who were breast cancer survivors. And I just spent the day crying. Like the realness of these ladies, they were so outside of their comfort zone. They didn't want photos. They did. Like they said, yes, they came. I didn't make them. But just the courage to be here to do it for themselves, for other people going through it, for their friends that didn't make it, you know? And it's, yeah, I just think it's been one of the coolest things we've done in business to be able to give back. But I also think it's one of the coolest things we've done in terms of like customers loving your brand, you know, like.
Well, it's being relatable and getting people to resonate with a cause, a brand, but it also shows, as you said, right, your organization, your brand has always been heart-led right from the start, right? And that's, people can feel that. And when they can feel that passion and that kind of heart for business, for people, for causes, they attach themselves to that, because there's so many brands out there that it's just about the dollars, it's just about the numbers.
Totally. And there's so many brands that just drop shipped. And I'm not saying we're killing it. This business is way bigger than us, obviously. But there is a stat, and I should know it, but it's something like, it's along the lines of women-founded businesses often generate way higher returns, and they get, in terms of venture capitalist funding and stuff, they produce way higher returns for that wasn't explained very well, but you know, because they lead with their heart. I know that sounds so airy-fairy, but there are some, like Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx. Do you know her in America? And when she sold that, she gave like all of her staff like 25 grand or something.
Yep.
So freaking cool. How many businesses are doing that? Not many.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's interesting. It's just interesting, and it, you know, I was having a conversation with my mum last night actually, and we were talking about, we were actually watching the movie One Life with Anthony Hopkins, and I don't know if you've seen that, but it's definitely an amazing movie to watch. I think it was a 2023 movie, And he basically, back in the Holocaust, back in, World War II, kind of got kids out of Czechoslovakia, and how hard it was and how he fought. But you'll have to watch the movie. I'm not going to give you or the listeners too much away if they haven't seen it, but it's definitely one that really kind of made me think around the world today. And I said to my mum, can I just say, how many countries at war today are run by female leaders?
Yeah, that's interesting, eh? Although not everyone was a fan when we had Jacinda in power here.
But she didn't start any wars.
She certainly didn't start any wars, and she, I think, rightly so, kept us locked down and kept COVID out of here for quite some time. But that's very profound, isn't it? Like, that's pretty wild. There's a lot of war going on.
How many female leaders in history have started wars or started aggression?
Oh, I couldn't. I've never thought about that.
Yeah. I had that reflection last night, and I went, because for me, I think, and it's interesting because I see a lot of organizations, and you see a lot of organizations globally get in the absolute shit. And who gets them out of it? It's a female leader, and I think it's because of that heart, and it's because of maybe possibly more empathy. But I think the approach is different. And I think, I see even in Australia, we've seen organizations that have just got themselves into the shit. They come in with a female CEO. The female CEO gets them back up and running again. And then a male takes over, and it's like, it amazes me. And I think males and females both have their strengths. But yeah, that reflection on how many female leaders have started wars, or how many countries at war or in major problems now are run by female leaders. And you mentioned Jacinda Ardern, but for me, she was still very heart-led in what she did. She may not have been popular, and not popular towards the end, but she was very much heart-led, and she didn't really change her values on what she felt was right.
No, I completely agree with that. And she was really popular. She got in for a second term, right? But I think, obviously I can't speak for anyone else, but I think the reason she didn't get in a third term is sometimes it's easier to just, because a lot of it was around people thought she left the country in a financial hole, right? But also we haven't been in that many global pandemics. And the other thing I would say on that is, sometimes it's easier to look outside for someone to win something, someone else's reason for your problems, instead of maybe we should look inward and what else can we do should we start a side hustle? What should we do if we're worried about money? But it's quite easy to just be like, it's the government's fault, isn't it?
Yep.
But yeah, I think Jacinda Ardern, she stayed true to her the entire time, and she led with her heart. And yeah, I felt very lucky that we had her as the Prime Minister during that time.
And I think that if you think about anyone that serves, the energy, the focus, and there is a huge drain that takes. And over 2 terms, almost 3 terms, it does take its toll. Basically the sacrifice that people in leadership positions, and even we talk about, the sacrifice just in running a business, takes a huge toll on you to actually serve other people and provide, in your case, a product for other people.
Yeah, I agree. It's really interesting.
On that point, Deb.
Not for me. I don't fucking be Prime Minister. It is. Yeah. It's such a thankless job, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. At this point in time, there's a lot of people that are kind of going through a lot of things. The world is a bit of a crazy place, but what are some of the barriers to people living a happy and fulfilled life out there for the people that you are working with?
Having a sense of their dharma or purpose in life. Everyone has unique talents and abilities. so that I, for instance, my Dharma would be such that I can speak to 20,000 people for 5 hours without notes, but I can't fix anything. So if my car breaks, I'm stuck. I've got to call AA. So if I work in my area of excellence and my particular area of genius, it just comes out of me. It bubbles out of me. And what happens is people try to work in areas they have no talent in, or they force themselves, and it doesn't work. So the one is to find out where you naturally get ignited with excitement, where your passions are. It's not just emotional. If you chose to do something, which would be natural. So I have people who can sing. I have people who can create wealth. I have people who can organize businesses. I have people who can organize companies. And so they have an area of talent, but they'll have an area of non-talent. And a lot of people, especially in the public system, usually are told by teachers who never made a living. Remember, teachers make as much as a barber. That they should do X, Y, and Z rather than deal with their natural passions and ability and build their life around what they're good at.
Yeah.
I work with passions, my passions, finding your passions, connecting you and your passions, so that when you start to do something, you really genuinely enjoy doing it. It just bubbles out of you. Most people are watching television, are eating Kentucky Fried Chicken, and they build their life around entertainment and distraction. And so that most people that I know, even the very wealthy ones, don't live from their own passions and talents, which is a sadness for me. Many people plan to die by the time they're 80. They basically set up a life that's so boring that they die. And I'm 88 now. I plan to live to 120. My life is predicated on building a life worth living. And I find that most people don't have that in their life. They just sort of see what happens. And so that they blow their chances. So I have at age 88, I have another 25, 35 years to go. And the key is I know that if I am not engaged in pushing against my boundaries, I'll die also, from boredom mostly. And so we're caught up in a paradox of having talents, having ability, having areas of genius, not being told what they are, told that it's almost selfish to be wealthy. It's selfish to just build your life around you and your talents and your gifts, which I think is all lies, that these are cultural lies that keep people trapped in their smallness. I don't know if that's clear enough, but it's very clear to me.
Yeah, it's very good. Now, you talk about black swan events, Dr. Fred. Can you kind of explain what a black swan event is and how you help people navigate those?
A black swan is something that surprises you, that you're not prepared for, but it happens to everybody. So that in a normal lifetime, you're going to have black swans. Black swans can be a motoring accident, could be a divorce, could be getting cancer, could be being embezzled, could be basically having something take over your life, whether it be a medical issue or a financial issue or a divorce. And when it takes over your life, you're usually not prepared for it, and you do it anyway. Many people see that as sort of like a mistake when it happens. Oh, why me? Why am I chosen to be picked on? When in fact it happens to everyone. But if you're prepared for it, you make something out of it. And if you're not prepared for it, you get knocked down by it. And so part of Black Swans is to prepare for the things you can prepare for in life, having enough money, having a good lifestyle, having healthy eating patterns, having a fitness program, all of which you can control, and be aware that there'll be things that you won't prepare for. You'll go through a traffic light and someone will crash into you, and you'll have to deal with the output of that. So we have in life things that we don't control and do control, and to realize that both of them happen, and they're not a curse, but they're part of life itself. And your job is to handle both artfully.
And for people that are going through that, and obviously something that I've experienced as well, it's very much about self-awareness. So when you talk about, people being more aware of themselves, what are some tips for people to gain more self-awareness?
This is a tough question because everyone is different here, Steve.
Yep.
One of the things about self-awareness is on a scale of 1 to 10, are you having a 10 out of 10 day? So every day as part of my morning meditation and as part of my prayers, my goal is to have a 10 out of 10 day, which is not perfect, but excellent. If I'm having a 10 out of 10 day, the day it follows a format. And I stay with that, and then I have fewer black swans and fewer things out of my control. When I'm shooting for 10 out of 10 days and I go to a 9 or an 8 or a 7, I'm already off course. And my goal that day is to get back to 10 out of 10. So when the day finishes, I can say, I got not to a perfect day, but I got to an excellent day. By staying in the 9-10 zone, life does you right. It comes out okay. Once you allow it to take you over, then you can knock all over the place. You have no control.
Going through my, obviously burnout, depression, fatigue, and struggling with anxiety, it was interesting. The 10 out of 10 day principle and the teachings that I had in the mastermind with you have really helped me. And one of the key things is what brings you joy, right? And I remember the day one of our mastermind, and you said, I want you all to write, work on a list of 500 things that ignite you, that make you happy, that bring you joy. And I remember all of us kind of looked at each other and went, 500? But it wasn't, what I worked out was it wasn't necessarily having 500, but it was a big number, an ambitious number that made you think, what are all, like when we think what makes us happy, we think these big things, right? But it can be as easy, and this is what I kind of pass on to people now, and the people I work with, is it can be as easy as making yourself a nice cup of coffee. It can be as easy as reading a book, just breathing. So it gets you thinking about what are all the things. And I know through my kind of journey that I've gone through is that I know if I'm not having a great day, I need to book a massage in, or I need to go for a walk on the beach, or I need to do all these things. And that is the premise of having a 10 out of 10 day.
It's the premise of taking charge of the day and not having the day take charge of you. If you're in a culture where everyone basically watches television, uses drugs, drinks alcohol, and wastes their life until they die. In other words, they hang around long enough to fulfill their cultural requirement of not dying young. So you die, you're 80 years old, you still have another 40 years, but you're going to commit suicide by not having a reason to get up in the morning. So you don't basically have a passion or a dharma or a destiny that you're following. As opposed to, let's assume that you're the head of a household and you have 6 kids and you have to feed them. That could be your dharma. It could be that you have a project. We used to run orphanages in Cambodia, and that was our dharma for about 8 years. We were basically providing for 30 or 40 children at a time. So it gave us a purpose that we took on, that gave us a reason to get up in the morning that was righteous and in the right direction. And what you find is most people don't have a reason. They just get up and wait to go to sleep, or they wait to have a drink, or wait to watch television, all of which is a waste of time. Let's assume you build your life around what we call 10s, 25s, 50s, and 100s, things that make your heart sing at different levels. A 10 could be a cup of coffee. It could also be cuddling your wife. A 10 also could be going to the sports and working out in the team. A 10 could be doing things for family and friends. Where you're reaching out of yourself. For instance, we used to do things on a regular basis. My wife and I still do. We'll go to a restaurant and order the meal for the person next to us. So they'll order breakfast and we'll pay for it, and we'll leave before they get the bill. So by the time they get the bill, we've paid for it and left, and then they get a bill of a nice breakfast surprise. And that type of things is titillating and it's exciting. And that's part of what we call our dharma, or our purpose, to bring light to other people's lives.
What I wanted to ask you from an example perspective of your creative process was, recently on Father's Day, you released a song around your experience about being a stepdad. And so talk to me about where that thought came from and that creative process. And, you know, happy for you to, you know, kind of play that through as well, if you like.
I think there was a certain point where, and this is always a challenging time for a family that's transitioning through that process, and it's always a first time. Well, you know, generally speaking, there's always a first time where no one knows what's going to happen and no one knows how to approach it. But many people approach it maybe without, I mean, it maybe with the ego involved, or maybe just not thinking it through enough and not putting the kids first. I know there's probably more, you know, harsher stories than there are nice stories about these situations. And so in a way, we're lucky to be in the situation we're in, but I did still struggle with the idea, especially I don't have children of my own, that how are these kids going to embrace me? I could be the nicest person in the world. I could be, you know, as approachable as possible, and I know I'm good with kids. So, you know, I've worked with kids. I you know, it's just something that innately I am a kid at heart. So I've always, you know, just been. I've kept the child within me my whole life. I think it's important. But that's not going. That could be completely out of my control when they've got their real dad, and then there's the whole dynamic of, you know, the relationships, you know, not worked out for various reasons. The kids don't understand that. I try and think back of what it was like for me at that age, and I wouldn't have been able to understand that. And my parents didn't. My parents were together, and I think a lot of the people within my family and in that era stayed together, whether they were happy or not. And so I was just super scared about being accepted by these kids. So a lot of my songwriting around that time, and there's not just Never Gonna Be, there's another song called Brave, which I haven't released, which will come out next year, I would say, of me articulating that fear. And so Never Gonna Be was one of those songs, and you know, we went through that process. So that song's more a story about how it came to fruition, and actually Brave is more about the fear and me not having met the kids yet, and me listening on the phone with kids in the background, and you know, them not finding out about me just yet, you know, because we're in the really initial stages. And so we've got to be really, really careful. Whereas Never Gonna Be was more telling the kids, I'm not going to try and be your dad, but I do want you to love me. And I'm here. I'm wanting this to work. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? But I'm making my best. I'm giving my best effort to make this work. And we've got you at the forefront of our thoughts with every measured, you know, decision we make. So it was that yearning for them to love me, but it was also explaining to them that I'm not here to try and replace your dad, because you got a good dad, you know, and as I mentioned before, we're lucky to have that situation where, you know, Dad and I have a nice amicable relationship, and credit to him, you know, for embracing me. And it made it a lot easier for me, and it's also made it a lot easier for the kids to go through their process to finally feel the love for me, which they do now, And so there were a number of first times in that little few weeks of meeting Dad first. And we had to meet Dad first because we weren't going to let the kids meet me until Dad had met Dad, and then just navigating it maturely and going, okay, the kids are still at the forefront of this. How do we? There's hurt. There's a lot of hurt there. There's communication. I remember there was a first message I sent, to him saying, I know this is hard for you, but I think what you'll find is don't look at my Instagram or don't look at my social media and judge me from that, because they are, obviously you're putting your best moments up on those platforms. And I said to him, I'm pretty sure we're going to find we've got a lot more in common than we do have differences. Even though it might seem on the surface like we're different, because we're just, I think my line was, because we're just two guys in the world just trying to navigate all this, and it helps, and we communicated, and then we met the kids on a mutual holiday, and I speak about all that in that song. So I guess the song, right, speaks for itself.
Cool. Do you want to play it?
Yeah, let's give it a go. Hopefully there's no buzz. There will be a little bit, but okay. I want to put these headphones on like that. All right. Can you hear me there? Oh, good.
Sure can.
Would you look at that? I got another match on an online dating app. A real goddess, sudden above the rest. She goes first now, what else with that? Crazy first date, warm mid-state, down the streets to pass you up, but take the van back to the sunny lane. Forget about that trip to Europe. Then she says just a couple of things, I ain't adding more to the population. I guess I'd rather be safe in love, so let's navigate the situation. 'Cause I ain't ever gonna try to be your dad. You already got a good one. Never tell you that sometimes makes me sad. Only tell you how much I love your mom, and how love always takes a different track. Never goes the way you planned it. All I ask is you try to love me back, 'cause I ain't ever gonna be your dad. Now a lot of things gone under the bridge. Your little heads wouldn't understand, yeah. We're just trying to be the best we can be. Your mom and I, we don't have the answers. We had a triple date and it went pretty great. Your daddy put on such a brave face. We had a couple of drinks and then a couple more. Safe to say we got pretty wasted. Drove home just down the road, yeah, by the lake and past the station. Pretty dumb, never do it again though, for this love of the situation. 'Cause I ain't ever gonna try to be your dad. You already got a good one. Never tell you that it sometimes makes me sad. I tell you how much I love your mom, and how love always takes a different track. Never goes the way you planned it. All I ask is you try to love me back, 'cause I ain't ever gonna be your dad. I've been through hard times too. Good times don't come for free, and if we hadn't been what we've been through, we wouldn't be who we're meant to be. How damn lucky are your mom and dad? They've got two beautiful ones. I know it'll sometimes make me sad, but then I think about how much I love your mom. I love when it took this different track. Never went the way I planned it. I ask you to try to love me back, 'cause I ain't gonna be your dad. Oh, never, never, never gonna be the one. Never gonna be your dad. No, Oh, never, never, never gonna be your man. Never gonna be your dad.
That's awesome. I love it.
Thanks, mate.
As soon as I first heard that song, I was like, there is going to be so many people that are going to relate to this song.
Yeah, definitely.
Because in the world we live in, right, there's a lot of broken families and there's a lot of step parents, and I just feel the emotion every time I hear that song. But hearing it live through here is awesome. Can I ask, Tom, the storytelling, the relatable topics that you write about, such as this one, has there been any people that have reached out to you and kind of, talk about the impact that your songs have had on them?
Yep, definitely. I had the opportunity to play the song just prior to its release at a couple of these festivals. One was at Gympie Muster, and it was actually for a sort of a competition, which is kind of a weird concept, I guess, for music to be in a comp. But one thing it was great for, the crowd that we had there was much larger than I think most of the minor stages around, even the main stage. We had a bigger crowd there listening to our songs than some of the day acts on the main stage. And they broke the record for crowds this year in general. So it wasn't a case of them not being many people at the festival. It was record crowds. So we were really lucky. We played at this, I think it was called the Dodge Tavern stage. And, there'd probably be 400 people there. And so many people came up to me after that. I played a bunch of songs, but that's the one that stuck. I had probably 10 people, but more so there were 2 or 3 that came up and said, man, like, fan forever kind of thing, because you've basically just articulated what I can't. And all of them, and a lot of them were saying to me, you're in a lucky position, but like, kudos that you have done that, because our situation's super messy. A lot of these people have come from country towns too. So, they can't escape this reality. They've literally got to navigate it and face it head on, because they're in a little community and people talk. And I mean, that's the community I grew up in, and I know what it's like. Even as a kid and a young teenager in Western Victoria, I know that there was just chat around town that had just, spread like wildfire. And so I've had a lot of empathy for them, but it was so nice that people to come up and tell me, it's just given me a voice, or it's given me some clarity on the fact that I'm not alone, and that's the power of music. When that kind of thing happens, it doesn't matter about streams and playlisting and stuff. When you have that impact on an individual, they're the ones that are going to come back to your show over and over again and actually want to hear the same story. See if you can, see if you're telling it in a 2% different way to the last time they might have heard it. But if it's coming from you live, there's something rawer than anything else about that. They might listen to it on streaming, or even on a CD if they still buy that and your merch. But to come and listen to you telling that story live, and for them to be able to feel heard, is a pretty special thing. And that song definitely hits home with a lot of people, as you said. Regardless of the fact
stepdad, I took on kids at 8, 10 and 13 when I was 21, right? So when I listened to that, I was like, wow, like it really, and I think, through music, it's about how it makes you feel, right? So when you can relate to it, when it's got that storytelling, and you can kind of just sit there and resonate with it so much, it just kind of like even just listening to it, and I've heard it a few times now, but listening to you play it there, I was just like almost choking up just sitting here, because it's just, I could just feel it so deeply, but I could also feel it in you as well, right? I could feel that, you know, you're not just singing it, you're feeling it, right? And then the music's coming out of you. In life, we can sometimes have goals, and we can sometimes have directions and paths that we kind of want to see ourselves go down.
Amen.
And sometimes there's dead ends, and sometimes there's direction changes. Talk to me about not being able to reach the heights that you probably wanted to.
Yeah, I usually call that chapter, I often call that chapter the plane that never took off. It was tough, you know. I feel, you know, post high school, signed with the Brisbane Broncos, you know, by that stage, my dad had moved back to Africa and to help rebuild Africa, build schools and stuff like that. So I'd called him up and said, Dad, you know, I've made it. Things are going to change. I waited 3 years to make my NRL debut, only to get the tap on the shoulder from Wayne Bennett himself and let me know that the club's moving forward and I'm not part of the plans. And with that, it resulted in me going to, you know, the dark place. Self-worth was decreased, you know, and substance abuse became, you know, the forefront of it all. I was fortunate enough to receive a phone call from Des Hasler, who threw me a 1-year contract with the Manly Sea Eagles. But by then, you know, the mind games was too much for me. And I wanted to experience life, not having to wait for people to validate me as being good enough. And that's ultimately why I walked away from the game of rugby league. As much as I loved it, I wasn't in love with it. And so that's how that chapter closed. And I went and started performing arts.
And I know you obviously mentioned substance abuse there. I'm a mental health first aid instructor, so very passionate around that mental health side of things. And on the podcast, I've had people that have, you know, come from the military, and gone through their own struggles. One of the key things I wanted to ask you was, what do you think, because obviously whether it's, you know, sporting, whether it's military, whether it's first responders, lots of different industries, they invest so much into getting you into it, and then they're supporting you in it. But then afterwards, when that transition comes from being a professional sporting, you know, a professional sports star to then back to normal life, what do you think is missing, or what do you think needs to be done from a transition perspective in a lot of these industries to actually help people adjust back into that life?
This is something I talk about in my workshops as well, and, you know, I discuss with companies. I think it's a difficult thing. I don't think there's one thing, because ultimately the onus is also on the person who's committed to the system, or for example, in my case, you know, I chose to invest my time and dedication and life into rugby league. And ultimately, with time spent, emotions grow. And then, you know, what tends to happen is we start to gravitate our identity towards that which we are committed to. And when that gets stripped away, there's a sense of void. And only we understand that void. So it's difficult for companies and organizations to understand what that void looks like to you. I mean, they can assist with job assistance on the way out, or, you know, help you find the perfect partner, whatever it is, or give you some money. But ultimately, you know, the leading cause is the mental health instability. And that comes from that weird sense of, I don't know what to identify myself with or alongside. And, you know, and that's what I struggle with. And, you know, talking to my ex-teammates, it's the same thing. You know, some of them are making more money than they did in rugby league, but there's this weird sense of, this is not who I am. So it's a hard thing to pinpoint and say, create this system post their dedication to the craft, and it'll help them, you know, transition to a normal life. You know, we don't know what that looks like, because we were never there prior to, you know, this post event. So
you've been through that journey, and Gideon, and what I'd love to know, and people listening to this, is if they're kind of going through that identity crisis, I suppose, and they're going through that similar journey, what are some key things that you would suggest or recommend what did you go through? What if you were going through what you went through back then, the substance abuse, struggle of identity, what would be some of the questions? What would be some of the steps that you would have taken?
Most definitely. So the first things first is have a value. And what I mean by that becomes the foundation of how you live your life. Most of us, we put value in what we're dedicated to. So we're very extrinsically driven. We ambition, material, whatever. So when we're extrinsically driven, when that subsides, we feel like we're empty. So you've got to start with something within you, and the value will lead you to a sense of purpose. And purpose, I was just discussing the other day, is when you're attached to a system to help a resolve. When you look at the greats like the Nelson Mandelas, the you name it, Mother Teresa, Princess Diana, you find yourself based on the foundations of your value to help resolve something. And I think that's where you get that wholesome feeling. Like for me, my value and my purpose is to empower as many individuals as I can in the lifetime that I'm here, as well as meet people and, enjoy life along the side. But, ultimately that's my purpose, to remind people not to be defined by their circumstances and, build that foundation of value and then attach yourself to a purpose. And, through that purpose, you grow. So, yeah.
Yeah. Because I think in life, our purpose changes, right? You go through and when you're growing up, you've got a certain purpose. Then when you get into a relationship and you're a partner, you've got a certain purpose. And then you become a parent, and then down the track, you become a grandparent. And then all these different things, change just from a parenting perspective, but also then from a work perspective, a career perspective. And it can be hard to, like for me, I was a real estate agent, 21 years this year would be in real estate. And we still own the business. But for me, I haven't worked in it for a number of years now. But it was a really hard thing, hitting burnout and losing my identity. I was attached to, well, I'm a real estate agent. That's what I've been for so long. That's my value. That's my purpose. And it was hard, similar to someone coming, who's played rugby league since they were kind of almost born, right through to then coming out when they're 30 or 35 and hang on, what do I do now? I was a top, rugby league, or I hit this level in that industry. Coming out the other end, it's kind of like, well, I'm nothing now, and I think that's a really big challenge that people have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I was saying it's very important to have that foundation of a value, whereas mine is health and fitness. So regardless of what happens, go through that breakup or being made redundant, I'm always going to wake up in the morning, go to the gym, tick those boxes, still see myself as a relevant, aspect in life, and then reattack life, if you will.
Yep. So Gideon, if I was someone that came to you, had come out of a career, come out of an industry and I was just really struggling, I was feeling lost, and you sat me down, what do you think some of the questions you'd want to ask me, or what some of the questions you would ask me that would get me thinking and get me on the right path or heading in that right direction?
The first question I always ask is, what does the conversation about yourself to yourself sound like? Ultimately, because a lot of the times you will find, and, you would know this in mental health, a lot of the issues with, when we come to mental health or emotional health even, is the conversation is always about themselves and the circumstance. And if that conversation is not resolved, or it remains, within conflict or confusion, and that's what drives the inability to see yourself as something, So ultimately, yeah, what does the conversation about yourself to yourself sound like? And then start building on from there,
Yeah, that's so true though, because I know for me, for many years when I hit burnout and I wasn't going well, people would be like, oh, are you still in real estate? And I'd go, oh no, I'm struggling with depression and fatigue. And anxiety and all those kind of things. And all I was doing, and it took me years to work this out, all I was doing was just repeating that dialogue of who I was, right?
Hello.
Until, obviously I started the podcast and I became a mental health first aid instructor and a coach and a consultant. So when people ask me now, it's, I'm a podcast, I run a podcast, and then I go, that was all led through this stuff. So it's leading with a positive. It's not just kind of reiterating and kind of talking myself down to a certain point.
Right.
That conversation changed.
Right.
And that identity has changed, which obviously then increases the confidence, increases the way you talk about yourself, the way you think, the way you show up, and gives you a greater awareness as well, backed by having that attitude of gratitude as well of the path that you've walked.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sometimes you need life to hit that emergency stop for you to actually reassess. And you touched on a point there as well that you might be resentful, right, that you can't get to work. And I found myself, I might be at work, working hard on long days and being upset that I'm not at home with the kids or doing something. But then I'm at home with the kids and I'm getting upset that I can't work or do the things that I want. And so I'm always just projecting myself into this other space that I'm not, instead of just being present in that moment and enjoying that moment for what it is. And like, kids don't need that much. So the studies say that if you give them 15 minutes of autonomy where they can make decisions, do child-led play, and 15 minutes of some sort of love and engaging task, that's really all they need in a day. So if you can just be wholly present for a short amount of time, they'll benefit so much and develop well, but it'll fill your cup as well. You'll feel so good about it. And then you move on to the next thing.
Yeah. So talk to me about the decision. You've got 3 young kids, you're a single dad, and you go, let's jump in a van and go around Australia.
Yeah. Look, traveling is something I've been wanting to do for a while with them, but, we're always just too busy. There was always something else that was in the way. I've been donating blood for 25 years, and it became less of something I did and more of who I was. I just kept doing it. And after, having this emergency stop hit in my life and doing some deep work to work out who I am and what I'm about, I was having a regular donation at the Sydney Town Hall Blood Bank, and the nurse was talking to me about how many donations I've done and where I've donated at. I said, yeah, look, I've donated these centres. That was really cool. She just had this throwaway comment, you should do all of them. And I laid in bed that night and it echoed through my head, do all of them, do all of them. And I thought, you know what, there is something here. And, the mission of sharing blood donation and that doing good feels good is really important. But the other mission as well is to teach your kids to have courage, to dream big and do big stuff, but also to serve your community. And, the Bloody Good Tour was just born out of, this beautiful, beautiful consolidation of all these different elements of my life, the curious individual, the father, the blood donor, the passionate, community member. And this just came together into this crazy beast.
Yeah. And as you've gone through, you're about 3 months into the tour, is that right?
Yeah. We left 1st of August.
Yep. And you started where?
Central Coast. So we started just south of Newcastle. And we spent 1 month racing up to Cairns, and we did 8 donor centres on that path, and 2 months on the way back down doing another 16 donor centres. So instead of doing one big lap of Australia, doing a couple of smaller loops, so I can bring the kids home, they can spend some quality time with mum, their rest of the family, grandparents. They're even going to have a day at their old school, do a bit of a show and tell, a bit of a presentation, and reconnect with their teachers and fellow students. And then we kick off on the next leg.
Yeah, brilliant. So talk to me about, what are some of the statistics that, people may not know around blood donation in Australia?
Yeah, okay. Look, I'll cover the most common ones first, because I think they're so pertinent and need to get hit home, that 1 in 3 Aussies will need blood at some point in their life. So everyone knows someone that either has needed it or will need it. Then that, of the, almost 28 million Aussies, about 10 million are eligible, but only 3% of the population donate. And something 3%. I learned last year, only 3%. Right? So in a room of 100 people, 33 of them are going to need blood, but three of them only are donating to support all of those people. And one of the most shocking things which I learned last year, which really kicked this off, is that Australia actually imports about 40% of our blood and blood products because we don't have enough here. And I think, wow, we are exporting the joy of doing something good for your community. And I found that I was gobsmacked by that, and I guess that's part of the reason why I've got the really bloody good, phrase on this mission, because we're doing it for ourselves and for each other.
Yeah. When you look at the statistics, Simo, do you know, has it been on a slide down of donation, or are we increasing, or has it just been pretty stagnant?
Yeah, good question. So the number of donations that we're actually getting each year is generally on an upward trend. But through science, research, technology, and innovation, they keep finding more uses for blood. So plasma, which is one of the components which makes up just half of your blood, it's mostly the fluid. So it's mostly water, really, but it's got really good proteins and antibodies. They now turn that into 18 different products, which then can be used in over 50 different conditions. And so the number of uses for blood and blood products keeps increasing, so the demand increases as well.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. So for someone that has never donated before, what do they need to know? What do they need to do to kind of donate?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to actually call Lifeblood, 131495, and you can have a chat to someone about your eligibility. You can take an online eligibility survey on the Lifeblood website. Look, generally, if you're aged between 18 and 70, over 50 kilos, and in moderate health, you don't need to be an athlete, you're possibly going to be eligible.
Yeah, perfect. And as you've gone through, obviously you're 3 months into the tour, talk to me about some of the conversations or stories you've heard along the way.
Yeah, it's actually my favorite part about this tour has just been connecting with people. I've met a lot of recipients, so people that need blood and blood products, and their stories are really touching. The process of donating blood needs to be clinical, right? We're talking about medical products, right? So the quality standards are so tight. So it is a clinical product, and at the end of that, your blood is in a bag, and that's how it finishes. But to meet recipients and hear their stories about they've received immunoglobulins, which have been made from plasma, which come from my donation. And, that child that's now 6 was able to live past 4, and they now have a whole bright life ahead of them. Or someone that's in their 60s has actually now been able to live and see their grandkids and, support their kids with those grandkids. So the flow-on effect is incredible, right? It's not just the person that receives your product; it's their families, their colleagues, the communities. So that's been really inspiring. And actually, I've met so many donors as I go into the donor centers, and each of them's got such an interesting and unique story about why they donated, and sometimes even why they didn't donate in the past. I met a lady this morning that was petrified of needles. Always wanted to donate, but she was petrified of needles. And so for years, she just never did it. And a couple of years ago, she had her first child, and that process of being pregnant and giving birth is quite a process. And, it can involve needles, but there's other sorts of pain elements there. And on the back of that, she was like, well, if I can do this, then the needles are nothing. And she now donates quite regularly. She's done dozens of donations. And she feels so good about it. In fact, she and her partner, one of them donates while the other one sits with the kid in the refreshments area and has a chalky milkshake and cheese, and then they tag team in. And I thought, wow, if you say you're too busy or you're scared of needles, that story right there has got to make you do a double take and think about it.
Wow. So how many donor centers in Australia?
So there's 78, although I expect that by the time I finish, there'll be a couple more. Yeah. There's also, they also have the mobile unit. So they sometimes set up pop-up centers like near shopping centers, and they have the mobile buses that operate in some areas. And those pop-ups and mobile buses will do whole blood donations.
Yeah. What's the impact, Simo, that you want to make at the end of your tour? What do you want to see has made a difference in the blood donations?
Yeah, look, our ultimate goal is to save 100,000 lives. It's extremely ambitious to get there within the 12 months. But what I want to do is I want to start a movement of bloody good humans, right, that are rolling up their sleeves to do it for the community, for themselves, right, and for future generations. This whole point that doing good feels good is I think something that's overlooked. Get in there, take an hour to yourself, chill out, or meet a friend there, and save some lives while you're at it, and build that into your routine. Right, make it a routine, and be proud about it. Wear your heart on your sleeve that you're a bloody good human and contributing to the community.
That's awesome. And do they still provide the updates? Because I know there used to be like text updates that used to come through, or updates that said your blood's just being used somewhere.
Yeah. So sometimes they do that, and that makes it really special. Like we're talking about, it doesn't just finish in a bag, on a machine when you're done. That goes to a hospital, or at some point into someone's body, and sustains their life.
If you live the same life every single year and call that a life, I would argue that you haven't really lived. So go and try all the things. And yeah, there was such a beautiful, but then that also fueled my sort of frustration with the education system. I really felt like we were putting kids in boxes, and we were putting expectations on them, for our own. I guess the education system had its own agenda. The schools all have their own agenda. And I felt like we were really pushing IQ as opposed to EQ. And the more research I've done and the more I've grown my business and gone down this path, I think if we had a society or an education system where we fostered these kinds of conversations and giving kids the resilience to try new things and the courage to do things outside of the box and the courage to do the things that they're interested in, even if it's not, fitting inside a box. I think if we had those conversations and we fostered emotional intelligence, the studies and all of the research actually suggest that people would have more life satisfaction. And so, yeah, it was really throughout that time that I was like, I don't want to work in this system anymore.
So talk to me and let listeners know, some may not know, but what's the difference between IQ and EQ?
So if we look at IQ, it really is your thinking, your intellect, your ability to, it's what the academic system is. It's our ability to perform in that way using our logic and our mind and our thinking, which is beautiful, incredible, amazing. Our EQ is our emotional intelligence, and our emotional intelligence is our ability to regulate our emotions, to understand our emotions, and therefore to be able to understand everybody else and foster really meaningful relationships. And what I find so interesting is that one of the longest studies that's ever been done on human potential and human happiness, it was this study that was done, and I think it went over like 7 generations, 70 years or something. I think you might have, I can't remember what it's actually called. It evades me now. But anyway, it got passed on by professor and another professor because they kept dying, because this is how long the study went for. And they were tracking and asking the question, what is the thing that leads to somebody at the end of their life reflecting that they had a fulfilling life, a life, where they're not on their deathbed with regret? And I love this kind of study, this kind of conversation. And the answer was quality of relationships, not quantity, but quality. And if quality of relationships equals a fulfilling life, that leads me to believe that's something that we need to really be teaching, fostering, because not only does quality relationships equal a more fulfilling life, it's going to make, and this is what the studies all suggest now, which is why I'm on my high horse saying the education system needs to really prioritize EQ, because it also makes you more willing to go for things in the workplace. It makes you more satisfied in your work because you do meaningful work, because you are able to regulate and understand your emotions. So it creates a more satisfying career as well as personal relationships outside of our work. And to me, that's just so important. And for business owners too, I say EQ is like the number one skill you need. So yeah, that was my long-winded, ranty way of explaining the difference. And what I want to add to it is there is a misconception that it's IQ over EQ or EQ not IQ, and it's this false polarity, this false dichotomy. But all the evidence suggests that when you foster EQ, emotional intelligence, when you build that skill set, IQ can go up too. And I saw that so many times in the education system, really, high performing students who are so intelligent, so bright, so many kids who I know knew the answers. As soon as they went into an exam situation, anxiety kicks in, mind goes blank, scores don't reflect their intellect. And it's not because they have low IQ, it's because their EQ wasn't in check.
Yeah. And see, as we get older and as you kind of go through challenges in life, which I've been through and you've been through and we all go through, the older you get, you actually work out that with every challenge you discover more about yourself. There's more self-reflection, there's more self-awareness. You work out how unique you really are and how unique we all are, and we're all very different, right? But when you look at the education system, they put everyone in the same room, on the same desk, in an exam environment, and it just made me think then, you're talking about, some people have anxiety. Well, what if someone's best environment would be sitting in nature doing their exam? What if their best environment is sitting near the beach doing their exam? Now, I know there's a lot of things that can kind of go with that, and it's hard to make that happen, but how to foster an environment where people can be themselves from a young age and follow what they are drawn to, be in the environment they're drawn to, rather than have to just deal with the environment they're given, is a really interesting topic.
It's so interesting, and it's obviously that's a utopia, it's a utopia, but I can hear the logical and the, school principals and school executives going, yeah, nice, cool. Who's going to fund that kind of school? But truly, I've looked, like Finland has got one of the best education systems in the world, and they're very play-based. They're very in nature. They don't do the standardized testing that's like a factory production center like we do. And there are ways to do it. There are real leaders and pioneers in the education space that are creating alternative ways to help kids nurture their individuality. So it can be done, and I still have hope. One day I dream, I make a joke, I dream that one day I'd like to be like Oprah and build schools all over the place. But
you've got a school. You've got a school. Everyone gets a school.
Yeah, everybody gets a school. And I built my own school in the form of my business. But what's really reassuring to me is also that a lot of parents come to me and they're like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, the system isn't helping my child, or I know that my kid's got so much more and they're not, all of these conversations that I have. And the coolest study that I ever read told us that parents are the number one influence in a kid's life. So regardless of whatever system the kid is in, or the teacher they have, or the peer group that they're hanging around, I thought it was really cool and really reassuring as a parent to know you are really the key influencer, and that's so empowering as a parent.
Yeah. Even though when you're going through the system as a parent, you're going through that timeline, you think they don't listen to you, but over time, like we've got 5 kids, I've got 3 stepchildren, and then we've got two kids together, and 15 and 17, one's just about to, as I said, finish year 12. But it's interesting because they come out with things and you go, oh yeah, who said that? They are listening, even though they don't want you to think or know that they actually listen to you. They do. And it really is about supporting your children to be who they want to be. Yes, we can try and cushion things, but they do need to learn their own lessons. I think one of the key things is, as well as that, for those that are listening to this episode that are maybe finishing school or at a point in their life where they're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Like from a school perspective, I've never really looked at the marks on a report card for my boys. I've always looked at what type of person are they, because for me, and you were talking about recruitment and people that are hiring people into organizations, you know, I prefer to look at what someone's like rather than what their qualifications is, because how someone is so much more important than what marks they got in school. Like people that are finishing school now, graduating, and they're going to be waiting for their uni kind of intakes and those kind of things. And there's going to be a number of different emotions out there. There's going to be some people sitting there going, I just wasted my whole school career. I failed. There's all this anxiety around it. And then there's going to be the people that are like, I smashed this. I'm like getting the right, I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a doctor and those kind of things. And you've got people also like my 15-year-old, he's going into an industry school next year. So doing a lot more from a trade perspective, right? And I remember going to the races, 10 years after I graduated, and I caught up with a lot of my friends from school. And it was interesting because the lawyers and the engineers, some of them were still at university. They were still studying. Whereas the guys that were the trades, which in some cases you would think back then they were probably the drop kicks or the class clowns, right? Some of these guys had like crews of 10 or 12 people. They had holiday homes, boats, jet skis. They had the life, the family, the white picket fence. And you sit there and you go, but these other guys have got a hex deck the size of someone's mortgage and they haven't started their career yet, right? So it really shows me that it doesn't matter. You pave your own path.
Gary, take me back to working with the AFP, obviously very high stakes, high pressure, high stress roles. Like how did you, I suppose, what kind of mindset did you have to have daily in those kind of roles?
Yeah, I wrote a book about my experiences called Externally Bulletproof, Internally Brittle, which, I thought was quite reflective of my experiences. And, I suppose as a young man growing up in Western Sydney, as a young man growing up in the 80s, I suppose, in the early 90s, and then moving into an alpha-dominated environment, I was probably built to be externally bulletproof. My whole persona was about showing up, getting the job done. We were highly trained, of course, but there wasn't a lot of conscious thought or practice going into what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. In fact, I didn't think it was too special, to be fair. It was just what I did. I think that there was definitely a mindset and a focus and a discipline there that has been beneficial to me in my post AFP life and even going through the struggles. And that was the discipline of showing up, of seeing things through, of finding solutions to problems that other people may not be able to see. And there was a period of my life where, that problem solving ability eluded me for one specific problem. But there's certainly been skills that I've been able to call on and go back to in this part of my life as well. But yeah, primarily, I suppose back then there was almost, I won't say it was a false bravado, but I didn't focus on any of the things that could go wrong or any of the external noise. It was, how do I show up and be I wanted to be the guy. I wanted to be the one who got the job done. And so I probably blocked out a hell of a lot of, internal noise or internal messaging or fear factor because I had to be the guy.
Mm. And what were some of the most challenging aspects of working for the AFP?
Again, I find it difficult to say because I really love my job and it felt to me like a lot of it came naturally to me. I suppose the difficult part as a more mature person looking back was that there really was and potentially is, I haven't been there for a while, but a very performance-based attitude to the whole environment. It was about how well you could do your job. Some people believe it's about how many people have, what relationships that you had and who you were friends with and that sort of stuff. But ultimately you are defined by the work that you do. And that becomes very problematic when you're, again, at the pointy end of performance, because how do you get better than the best job that you've done? How do you get more extreme than the most extreme environment that you've been in? And pretty soon, they become the things that start driving you, and you lose sight of yourself, I suppose. And I think a lot of people in high performance environment almost live it's almost like they're pretending to be somebody, just to keep up that persona, or just to keep their, the external, external accolades coming. And that's, again, in hindsight, that's probably was probably the most difficult thing for me personally, through the experience.
Mm. And talk to me about, obviously, people in high pressure roles, in law enforcement, in military, in a lot of those industries and roles that have those very high performance, kind of cutthroat, very high stressful situations. Talk to me about the sacrifice on mental health.
Well, it gets put aside. It gets spoken about a lot, and I genuinely believe that people want to do better in that field. I do think they're not really sure how, and but it does get put to the side, because there's inherent in us all is this belief that in order to be strong, I can't be weak, and we start to have this view or this vision that any expression of weakness indicates vulnerability, and vulnerability equals, being incapable of doing the job. Now, again, as somebody on this side of that life, I know that to be a complete falsehood. But it's a conditioning that probably starts very young for a lot of people, and continues on. And so, the experience with mental health is primarily, it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, then you've got a problem, you're out of the job. And so you mask it. If you start to feel off, people will mask it with drinking, they'll mask it with gambling. Some people will mask it with drugs, scrolling Netflix, eating bad foods, cheating on their partners, telling dirty jokes when they shouldn't be. There's a whole range of ways that people will mask from themselves, some of these, some of these mental health issues, or feelings of not, living a fulfilled life, or not understanding who they are or their purpose. And, in isolated cases and in small ways, they don't become problematic. Unfortunately, in my case, it became quite problematic. And there's a few other examples where people have gone to extreme measures, in order to not feel that pain. Thankfully I got through the other side, but there really is a difficulty for the individual to understand, the mental health experiences that they're having.
Yeah. And when you talk about the mental health in those kind of positions, talk to me about what's the onboarding process from the AFP, and is it kind of not physically beat you out of it, but do they beat the vulnerability out of you?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I can only speak from my time, I suppose. And it's, to me, it's not a conscious process, right? It's not like, that people say, right, we need these guys to be, or these guys and girls to be hardened and to put all their feelings aside. And because in reality, we probably know that that's not the best version. I mean, the most elite of our military soldiers, in Australia, the SAS, go through vulnerability practices with their own team, right? But the rest of the military doesn't really, right? And that should probably tell you something, that if the most elite people are doing it and are comfortable with it, then it probably should be something that we should look at. But in a general sense, again, it's not. I wouldn't suggest it's a conscious practice. It just becomes a learned experience. It becomes cultural, that if somebody speaks up with a problem, a mental health problem, and they get, sidelined, or potentially bullied, or made fun of, or someone just says to them, "Oh, come on, toughen up, buttercup," or in my day, it was take a spoonful of cement and harden up. Um, you know, Eventually those small things create a culture whereby, um, not only do you not feel comfortable to speak up, you don't even feel comfortable to have the feelings yourself. And so it's not that you're not telling anybody else, you're actually masking it from yourself. I spent 10 years with a major depressive disorder, and I reckon it took me at least seven before I stopped, pardon my language, before I stopped bullshitting myself, that this would all go away when I had a holiday, or this would all go away when I got a promotion, or this would all go away when I bought the next house, right? Like it probably took me 7 or 8 years before I started going, hang on a minute, there's something to this thing. And then it took me another couple of years to try and figure out what to do about it. By then I was already in a world of hurt. But I think that the cultural experience is not intentional, but it has just occurred over, it's like turning around the Queen Mary. It's something that started probably in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and just kept perpetuating, to where we are today. And hopefully those conversations are changing, and not only the conversations, but the actions.
Yeah. And you talk about your experience as an AFP in the AFP security detail. Obviously, you said back in 2007, you were on Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's detail. Talk to me about, what do you think people most misunderstand or don't know about people that are in those high positions, like prime ministers, people in very high positions? There's a lot of talk, I suppose, around, oh God, they get paid $500,000 a year and they get all these perks and everything like that. But what do you think most people misunderstand about high performance people, such as prime ministers?
For a great deal of them, there is very often no off switch. There are elements of the life that, I'm sure people envy, and people would love to enjoy and get the perks and want to be on the front cover. It doesn't matter if you're an athlete or a high profile businessman. But there's a good saying I heard once that, people want to be the noun, they don't want to do the verb. And everybody looks from the outside in and they see the great experiences and they see the front cover of the magazine and they see the big pay packet. And I don't think they realize what it actually takes to get there. I'm sure there are some occasions where what it takes to get there, aren't very good stories. But by and large, the high performers that I've worked with, in my career and that I've worked with since, certainly this post AFP career, I don't think people understand what it takes to genuinely get there and stay there. Getting there sometimes can be done by talent, but it's very hard to turn it off if you're at such a level where your whole persona is built around the performance that you do. And I think Elon Musk has said, you don't want to be inside his head. People want his life, I presume. People want his money. People want the ability to be able to do whatever they want and buy Twitter and call it X. But what they don't realize is what the whole 24/7 experience is like. And is it worth it? To some people, yes. And I think to some people, it probably isn't.
Between being growing up and good, I spent my 20s not partying, but in business, buying my first house and doing all the things that I thought I should do right. And it wasn't until sort of my life, as you would say, derailed when I was about 31 actually. Well, actually 28, it probably derailed because I was married and had been married for 3 years, had been with my partner for 10 years. And I had decided that doing all the right things had not worked for me particularly well. And I was really, really unhappy. And so I left my marriage and a lot of things happened. I lost my hair, I became bald. And so that was quite interesting time. And then at 31, I was diagnosed with quite an aggressive form of breast cancer, which, was fine in terms that I had surgery, radiotherapy and chemotherapy. But then 7 years later, I was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, metastasized in my lungs, and I was quite unwell. And, I was basically given, and I say given, 12 months to live. So there was 0% chance that I would live beyond 18 months. And the funny little oncologist said to me, he said, it's not looking good. You need to go home and put your affairs in order. And I don't know, like my mum would tell you that I am the type of person, which won't be any surprise to anyone already listening to me, that I literally get up in the morning just to hear what I've got to say. she would say, oh my God, the miracle happened when Di was sitting in oncology and she shut up long enough to listen. But as it happens, I didn't listen to the funny little oncologist. I listened to what I would refer to as kind of like the whispers of my own heart. And I guess that through, really traumatic events like this, where we're told that we've only got a year left to live, everything becomes very real in terms that I guess I just thought, if I can't live my true life now, if I can't listen to myself now, when will I be able to? So I really leaned into listening to the three whispers that I refer to as from my own heart. And, they were literally, if you've only got 365 days left, for God's sake, be happy. So quite simple, just choose happy. Now, I don't know about you, Steve, but we're not meant to just be happy. So that turned into being present, being incredibly present. And the second thing was to go natural. I was being offered palliative care chemo, which is not hard to turn down because basically there's no longevity, no extra longevity. It's just they're trying to reduce your symptoms. So if I was slightly arrogant in any way, it was around the fact that I thought I could reduce some of my symptoms naturally. So I didn't really know what it meant to go natural, but I just thought I'd figure it out as I went along. And the third thing I heard was to be grateful. Now, if we can paint the picture, I'm 37 years old. I've just moved to Christchurch to be with the love of my life. We haven't had children. And I'm like, seriously, what the frig do I have to be grateful for? Like, mind blow here. Like, what on earth do I have to be grateful for? And this little voice inside of me said, don't worry, you've got 365 days to figure it out. And so off I went. I went on this incredible journey of just going, well, if I've only got 365 days left, I might as well live them my way. And I guess my whispers were kind of like my North Star at the time. They kind of gave me direction and what I should do or how I should approach things, for want of a better word. So that's what I did. I went off and lived just as best as I could. But I guess where the story kind of turns is that about 4 weeks after I was diagnosed, my partner left for work for the day and I decided to stay at home, which was probably one of the only days that I didn't go to work. And I remember sort of sitting there thinking, I am really, really afraid of dying. Like, I'm really afraid of dying. And I just don't want to have this dark feeling with me for the next 300 odd days. So I kind of had this chat with death, where I kind of said, hello, death, it's about time we sort of had a chat because I've been not trying to think about you for quite some time. And while I can't exactly tell you what was said, what I do know with all my heart is that I consider her my angel of death. And she comes with me now everywhere I go. And she is just the reminder to me that I will not worry about the day that I die, but I will be obsessed with the way that I'm living. And I will be obsessed till the day I die with each and every day I do have and making the very, very best of it. And I think that was my sort of true turning point where it was like, let's not focus on the thing we're trying to avoid. Let's actually really, really double down on the thing that's super important to us and the thing that we want more of, which is actually life and living. And so, about 14 months after I was diagnosed, my partner said to me, I think you're well. He said, you're really a pain in the ass again. He said, you're just back. And I was like, I think I'm well too. And he very quietly said to me, what do you think we should do for the rest of our lives? And I said, I think we should have a baby. And bless his soul, he said, sweetheart, we've been through 5,500 earthquakes because I'm from Christchurch here in New Zealand. He said, we've relocated two of our businesses. We're going to relocate one of them again. We're living at your sister's and there is no action happening here. Because I said to him, we all have rules in life. And I had this little rule that I wasn't going to have kids after I was 40. That was just not going to happen. And so I'd done the math and I said, you've got 6 weeks. And he was like, oh, sweetie. And he goes, there's no action happening here. We're at your sister's small house, blah, blah, blah. There's 6 of us in this house. So I said to him, don't worry, I've booked a weekend away at Akaroa. So we went to Akaroa for 3 nights And I'm just that type of person that likes to learn something from any situation I possibly can. And so what I learned that weekend is that my husband, this is a man that we check for a pulse. Happy face, sad face, no difference. He's dry as anything. But if you give him a task, he performs exceptionally well under pressure. And 3 weeks before my 40th birthday, I gave birth to our one and only child, Jackson James Foster. And I guess the purpose of me wrapping up the story like it is that I've been very fortunate to experience what's called a radical remission. So with no medical intervention, my body has innately healed, and I have no sign of disease. And I guess the sort of dun 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 dun, my son will be 13 in December. So it was nearly 15 years ago that I was diagnosed.
It's truly phenomenal. It's just such an inspiring story. And there was obviously a reason that you had to stay around, Di.
Well, see, I don't believe that. I don't believe that things happen for a reason. I think we find reason in things that happen. So given that I have stayed around, I'm finding a reason to be here.
Yep. Di, talk to me about the first time you got diagnosed. Talk to me about how that hit you.
I was 31. I had radical surgery and that I had a mastectomy. I wasn't with my life partner. I was with, like a boyfriend at the time. I knew that he wasn't my life partner. I just had the sense that I needed to do treatment. Otherwise, I was going to run out of time. And I just knew that however I thought about it was going to be my biggest friend. So before I went and had the surgery, I had made peace with the surgeon and the surgery that I was going to have because I've had no reconstruction. And I also I remember when they told me what was wrong and what they wanted to do. And the first thing they said is, you need to come and get the surgery in 2 days' time. And I said, no, I'm going to wait and I need to decide. Actually, I remember having this conversation. I need to decide. And they said, but there's no choice. And I just laughed and I said, oh, there's always a choice. There's always a choice. And if you give me the space to choose, then the outcome, no matter what it is going to be better. The outcome is going to be better if you give me the space to choose. And it was 5 days that I just meditated and just sat with myself. And then when I rang them and said, I'm going to get the surgery, and I went in, I wouldn't say I was happy, but I was happy. I was happy enough to get it done. The next morning I had my surgery at 5 o'clock on Thursday night. The next morning at 7 o'clock, I had a little bit of makeup on, my pink dressing gown on, and I was sitting up in bed waiting for my dad to come in and see me, and I wasn't, he just laughed when he saw me because there I was, pretty as a picture, just already waiting for my first visitor for the day. And because I took responsibility for the decision, it was nobody else's responsibility. This is one thing that I find really, really interesting is that I might preempt a question here, but if there's one thing that I would never change about myself, it's the fact that everything is my fault. My health is my fault. It's my responsibility. So I don't outsource anything. I will quite happily take advice and I'll piece it together, but this is my life. And so therefore everything is my choice.